All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be our next video on hierarchy of life. So let's get started on this next video. So let's go through and try to understand what a system is. Before we go through and look at the order of all of organisms, let's try to understand what a system is. So we have a system, and then we have the surroundings of that system. So why am I trying to go through and look at this, and why is this related? Well, a system is an interdependent group of items forming a unified whole. And then we also have the surroundings that coincide with that system. So when we think about order and hierarchy, we're creating systems that build upon each other to create organisms and to create ecosystems and to create the globe. So all of these things are connected and build upon each other and are considered a system. So if we think about the Earth, well, let's think about the Earth in terms of a system, and let's zoom in on the Earth. Now, if we zoom in on the Earth, we have space and we have the layers of the atmosphere. But within the surface of the Earth and within the crust, we have cities and we have mountains. And if we were to further zoom in on those cities, we would see buildings. And if we further zoom in on those buildings, we would have rooms. And within those rooms, we would have people and we would have offices and desks, etc., etc. So what this is analogous to is like each of those Russian dolls. And we can enclose systems and have larger and larger systems built upon order, just like these Russian dolls that go through and create a larger doll and encapsulate each other. So as we go through and think about this, I want us to think about what emergent properties are. So if we're looking at a termite colony needs to remove the carbon dioxide in order for the entire colony to survive. Now, a colony is a system with smaller and smaller systems present. And emergent properties are properties that arise through interactions among smaller parts that alone do not exhibit such properties. So what that means is you go through system. So if we go from the colony down to the columns within the colony down to the individual termite, we're going to have properties that didn't exist within that system. And the termites themselves are systems working together with different groups of termites to create this larger colony to allow for the entire system, that entire colony, to go through and survive. So be thinking about emergent properties. So the first order that we're going to go through and look at is the atom. And all life and all things, all objects, are made of atoms. So an atom is the smallest object that retains properties of an element. It's the smallest piece of matter that really forms to create everything. We can think about matter as different particles that are going to come together and they bond eventually to go through and create organisms here. Now, as we go on, we can see atoms are composed of an electron, a nucleus, and the nucleus contains protons and neutrons for an overall charge of 0. But as we think about this, we get to molecules. And a molecule is a group of atoms that are bonded together, representing the smallest fundamental unit of a chemical compound that really take part in a chemical reaction. What this essentially means is the atoms are going to bond together to form molecules, and these molecules will then go through and create other molecules that will then bond together. Now, a common molecule that we can think about is water. And water is composed of two hydrogens and an oxygen, so two hydrogen atoms and an oxygen atom, to make a larger unit. Now, next we get to macromolecules. And macromolecules are molecules that contain a very large number of atoms. So when we're thinking about this, we're thinking about proteins, nucleic acids, or synthetic polymers here. And each of these molecules is going to go through and come together to form different units. So we're taking atoms, and then we're taking molecules, and then we're taking macromolecules to go through and form larger units or larger systems within an organism. So an example of a macromolecule is going to be something like a protein. And these proteins are going to go through and form together to form organelles, cells, tissues, etc. So next we get to organelle. And an organelle is any of a number of organized or specialized structures within a living cell. So examples of this are going to be the Golgi, the mitochondria, the smooth ER, the rough ER, the nucleus. These are the things that are going to go through and form together to get a cell. Now, a cell is the smallest structural and functional unit of an organism. It's typically microscopic and consists of cytoplasm and a nucleus enclosed in a membrane. Remember, it only has a nucleus if it's eukaryotic. Now, a cell is going to, again, be distinguished between prokaryotic and eukaryotic. But we also have animal and plant cells, and we're going to look at the differences when we get into the cells unit. But I want us to know that we have different units and different groups when we're talking about prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells from the last video, and then animal and plant cells here. Now, this allows for further categorization of organisms. I don't want us to get too confused yet. I just want us to be exposed to that information. Now, after we go through and cells come together, we get to the next system, which is tissues. And a tissue is a distinct type of material of which an animal or plants are made of. And they're generally specialized. So if we're thinking about humans, we have smooth muscle tissue, cardiac muscle tissue, and skeletal muscles. So all of these tissue systems go through and form together to form organs and organ systems, which we're going to look at next. But tissues are a combination of cells, and they're specialized for different functions. Now, next we get to organ. And an organ is a group of tissues in a living organism that has been adapted to perform a specific function. So tissues come together to form different organs. And common organs that we think about here are going to be the heart, we have the lungs, here is the liver, and then we also have the intestinal system. And these organs go through, and they are a system among themselves to create a larger system called an organ system. Now, an organ system is a group of organs that work together as biological systems to perform one or more functions. So if we think about organ systems, we have the digestive, muscular, integumentary, lymphatic, endocrine, nervous, circulatory, urinary, respiratory, reproductive systems, and the skeletal system. And all of these systems essentially come together to form a larger organism. Now, an organism is an animal or plant of single-celled life form. So it has a minimum of one cell. So if we're thinking about this, remember, bacteria can be an organism, and they're prokaryotic cells, and they're also single-cellular. But we can also think about other organisms. So there are, in this case, the water bear, or in this case, an elephant. We can have lots and lots of cells come together to create tissues, organs, organ systems, and we can have organisms that have lots and lots of cells. But an organism is an individual animal or plant. In this case, we're looking at animals here, and we're looking at bacteria, and it has to have a minimum of one cell. Now, all of the organisms are going to come together to form a population. And a population is the number of organisms of the same species that live in a particular geographic area at the same time. So we might be thinking about a population of deer. We can be thinking about a population of penguins. We can also be thinking about the human population within a city. And remember, these are the same species. Organisms of different species, we're going to be talking about community. So this is all of the interacting groups, all of the species within a common location. So if we're thinking about the forest of trees and the undergrowth of plants, and then all of the animals that live within that environment, and the roots in the soil and the bacteria and the fungi, this makes up this biological community. So if we're thinking about a coral reef community, we have the corals, we have the plankton in the water column, we have the fish, we have all of the crustaceans living in there. There are a variety of different organisms and different populations all living in the same area, benefiting from each other and creating a larger ecosystem. Now, an ecosystem is a biological community that interacts with the physical environment. So now when we're thinking about ecosystem, we're not just thinking about the organisms, we're thinking about all the things interacting with the organisms as well. So if we were to look at this, we have Yellowstone National Park. Within Yellowstone, underneath, there's a volcano, and it creates hot springs and lakes and mountains and different types of plants. So it's all the organisms interacting with the abiotic and both biotic features of that ecosystem. So we can think about the elk, the wolves, all interacting with the river system. So the wolves and the elk both go through, the elk is going to eat the plants in the environment, the wolves will go through and eat the elk, but they both depend on the water, which is a non-living source of sustenance, to go through and live. So again, it's the interaction abiotic and biotic features amongst all the organisms in that community. So when we're thinking about each of these categories, each one of them is a system themselves, and there's the surroundings that they interact with, but each of them create a larger and larger system. And as we go through each of these, there are emergent properties within each of these categories. So again, we're thinking about it just like the Russian dolls. We can go to larger and smaller systems to think about how life interacts with both the biotic features and the abiotic features in that environment. And we can think about all of the systems together, joining and creating a larger whole. So did you guys learn? Well, did you learn a couple of things here? Did you learn what a system is and how a system interacts and influences biology? Did you learn the hierarchy of life? So from atom to an ecosystem. And then did you guys learn some details about each of those classifications? So obviously the vocabulary with some of the things that classify each of those categories and each of the things within them. This is going to be the end of the video. I will see you guys in class tomorrow.